pagi, Bu Ardi.
Gita, saya senang bertemu dengan Anda lagi.
Wah,
This is
senang
the
sekali juga sudah
only
diundang.
bahasa Indonesia that I'm going to talk to you today. Very good to see you again. How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually still I was in quarantine for the past 10 days, so I just got the negative result yesterday night. So yay.
Yes, no, happy to hear that. I guess we've seen so many people in our surroundings, family, colleagues, friends who've been infected. It's almost something, it looks as if it's more a matter of luck than anything else not to be
That's
infected.
true. That's true.
But,
I think this variant is a bit different also. It sort of creep up on you
exactly.
without you realizing.
Yeah, but well, happy to hear that you're out of your quarantine, and
Yes.
it looks as if for at least for Jakarta and hopefully also very soon for the rest of Indonesia, we're going to see a major improvement so we can resume our normal lives. Thank you very much for taking us up on our invitation to be part of a couple of interviews with women leaders. The context is International Women's Day, the celebration this year. Maybe I could start with asking you, what does International Women's Day mean for you?
Personally speaking, and also in the context of this year, in a way, International Women's Day has always been a milestone every year, at least personally, to start looking at how women are actually playing a role in decision-making places, specifically because I've been in the space of policymaking and governance and most specifically sort of collective action convening for the past maybe decade. And it has always been a concern of mine that women are not, there's not enough women in decision-making places, especially for Indonesia, now that we are working in LTKL and our district members, to see that maybe the proportion of female leadership on agency levels, for example, is less than 20% at this point in time. And how do we then use this day, well, not only the International Women's Day, but also the National Women's Day for Indonesia, as a moment to remind ourselves where we're at, but also to celebrate the small wins that we might already have. So for example, this year, the communication content that we're prepping is actually to showcase the 20% female leadership in the policy making space, but also in the district level, because we're doing collective action, we're also looking at it from leadership in other stakeholders group, in which for district level, it's harder to find actually female leaders, even in the active citizenship space. So people from civil society, people from advocacy group, there is very little female voice represented as leaders, which is quite discouraging, because at the national level, we see a lot of organizations that are actually setting up very great examples of having female as their leaders, but that's not translating down to the subnational level. So I guess for me personally, International Women's Day is having this day to actually remember what it is that we're fighting for, in a way, from female perspective, but also how are we progressing so far, because we do need that sort of success stories to keep us motivated that we are actually achieving, although bit by bit, changes on the ground.
Thank you. Yes, I agree that the balance between appreciating what progress has been made, but at the same time also pointing out that there are still many challenges left. You're probably aware this year's theme for International Women's Day is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. If you then reflect on what this specific theme means for you in your work, what would be your comments?
So in a way, we're also approaching it the same way. Right now, for just a little bit of a context for our organization, because it is a district association. So it is not like an NGO. It's a association that's set up by district government. Unfortunately, actually, gender equality and gender empowerment is not something that is top of mind for district level decision making. And this is similar with also sustainability in a way. So since 2020, we have decided that the way that we are going to allocate our resources as backbone team is that we're going to concentrate 20% for leadership, almost like trying to help the leaders find their vision, how to translate that into strategy, etc. The 30% are to work with actually bureaucrats in the governance system and also to work with leadership in other multi-stakeholders group. But the 50% are to work with young professionals that is actually come from there. They will be there regardless the changing in politics, the changing in government. And this is 17 to 35 years old professionals at the district level, and our goal is to convince them that by actually staying in your district, by actually looking at this is something that will catapult you to a good sort of future trajectory as well. So it's a bit similar with the theme that was mentioned. In a way, we work on the system to actually enable changes that might not occur right now, but it may lay the foundation for future growth that we want. So for example, right now, because we have been working with the 17 to 35 years old young professionals, we've actually helped a company in Siak district in Riau, for example, to build their first community-based enterprise where the villages are actually the one that is holding the share, so they become shareholders, and it's fully run by young professionals from Siak. And actually, what has been interesting because we work with them from the ground up, also building SOP, including on the gender lens perspective. We have now a running innovation lab that focuses on R&D for peat-friendly commodities that is fully run by young female scientists that is local from Riau. And this is not like we didn't intend for that to be the case, but because we laid down the foundation, it became like that. So it gives us also somewhat of a reason why should we keep working on the fundamentals and the governance and the structure and the system, which might not appeal to be like the sexy thing to do, but actually because working yeah, exactly, but it's like it's not the exciting part, right? Like you can easily work on the training component, work directly with the female young entrepreneurs, things like that, but actually by setting up system, you enable that to be something that works long term. And we're very happy, end of last year, that same company that was established during the pandemic got their first investors. So they built their first value-added product on fisheries, focusing on peat. They got their investors, they built the lab, and then they also won MIT Solve Challenge 2021, in which they're the third from Indonesia to have won that. So
yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Over time, you do see the impact of your different interventions, different efforts come together in a concrete result that would also for the future be very important and relevant.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, fingers crossed.
It's not always an easy process, and it takes an awful lot of time and effort and energy, but it's good to hear you tell about concrete results of all your work. I've heard you speak about the fact that maybe at a national level things are already a little bit better in place, but less so at a district level. Sometimes you hear people say one reason also to involve women more is that they are more impacted on the ground. And when we talk, for instance, about sustainability issues like the impact of climate change, I'm just curious, in your work, Do you already see the effects of climate change? And if so, do you also see a different impact on men and women? What can you tell us about that?
So in terms of impact on climate change, we actually did like a narrative research, a small narrative research since 2020 to our district. And the way that they've been interpreting, so first of all, climate change is not a top of mind, definitely. It's not something that people talk about or they can relate. Like if we were to use the word climate change at this district level, nobody can answer the question.
Sure.
So we had to translate that into different types of actual impact that, based on scientific evidence, can be linked to climate change. And in a way, the one thing that strike us the most that people can actually relate to is disasters. So the amount of the rate of disaster that have been going sort of rapidly increasing, even in places where they have no reason to be worried before, has always been something that they relate back to, like, oh, this is the change of weather, this is the change of weather pattern, this is why flooding is happening, the rainfall is heavier, the days are hotter. So things that relates directly to disaster are the ones that we see most impacting the way that people operates and people maneuver over their lifestyle at the district level. And from our district in LTKL, the top three sort of disaster related concern have always been forest and peat fire. And then the haze that gets that is part of the consequences, and then flooding, and in some areas, they also got hit by the tsunami and liquefaction. So those are the almost top three that people keep referring back to when we try to coax them with, like, what does climate change means for you. And again, because it's linked to disaster, then directly they would connect it back to the way that they make their livelihood. So in majority of the district, it will be heavily linked to agriculture, fisheries, and cattle ranching in some places, farming. Because it's heavily linked to those sectors, disaster plays a big role in actually deciding whether you will get a successful crop year or not. So because of that, then they can make the connection. If more disaster occur, then we will not be able to predict whether our livelihood would be safe or not. So that's basically the connectivity. And because of that sort of connectivity from their perspective, we also have designed our program that way, in a way not to sort of reflect too much, or like not to focus too much on like the climate risk or the climate change and the language behind it, but the fact that, okay, if you push for sustainable land use, then this will decrease the risk of disaster. It will increase your level of resiliency, and hence it will also affect the safety of your livelihood. So in a way, that's the linkage that have been made so far. In terms of between men and women, some of the right now, going back to the fact that majority of the places, the one who are formally working on this type of livelihood sectors are male, then the ones that are communicating concerns on livelihood level are also men. But the way that we see the female communicate their own concern has always been towards like the impact and the safety and the health of their children, of their family. So it has a different side of actually communicating things. Women would not only dwell on sort of like whether the way of them making money is safe, but also like, oh, how does this affect my children, how does this affect the health and and even the education level of my children. Issues like stunting, things like that, they can actually start relating it to the quality of water and the quality of soil that they feel are also affected because of the changing of the weather pattern. And in a way, sustainability in general, from the female perspective, has always been like the stronger stance is through like health lens and like safetyness lens, especially when it comes to family. The other thing that are maybe sometimes it's a bit like people don't see it, is the water and sanitation aspect from the female perspective, specifically because female have different needs as well, and the way that climate change impact water access, and the way that it also impact then sanitation behavior in general, would definitely be something that are like communicated by them, and by different groups. The way like yes, for example, just things that are very like blatant specific, but we don't automatically connect it, like things like female have periods, and when water access is something that is limited, then they definitely feel more pressure and more like it affects them even personally and in decision making ability, because they have lack of water access during that period. So things like that, it's very like on the ground on the ground impact that we sometimes don't think about, but yet we hear that from the stories that they communicate back to us.
Yeah, thank you. And I like how you stress the importance of sort of unwrapping this concept of climate change into a concept that is relatable to people on the ground, working in the fields, etc. And also how you emphasize that it's also because of the role and positions that women and men have been given, their impacts are different. I heard you also stress the importance of having young people involved. I'm just curious, do you see a different way in which young women have become involved from the way in which young men have become involved?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, like we don't have a proper like study yet on this, or like proper writing on this, but we have done a camp specifically. So we started our youth sort of focused in 2020, and by 2020 we sort of designed a camp where we would help young champions 17 to 35 through like small batches of funding. Essentially, it's very small. It's like $350 per project, as their micro seed fund for them to fundraise even more if they want to pursue a project when it comes to sustainable land use. And then from that camp, we got 40 plus graduates. So they have to follow the camp, and then they get the seed funding after the camp, and then we facilitate them to fundraise even more using the seed funding. And from the 40 candidates, like 60% are female, but we can see the differences in terms of the way that they design programs and the interest of it, and it actually are related to the stuff that we also found in terms of their role and the way that they look at disaster and climate crisis. So if we can cluster the different type of project into 4 clusters. So the first cluster being like advocacy and trying to sort of become the watchdog of the policy making and implementation. The second cluster is much more on like technical assistance, so building capacity on different stakeholder groups. The third cluster would be on implementing things on the ground, so actually making product, actually doing farming and things like that. And the fourth would be campaign, like much more communication and narrative and campaign building. For female, the participants are most likely choosing the third one, which is actually implementing stuff and building stuff, and actually so it's like one project is one family, one farm, and she actually go door to door and ask, families to build farm, basically. So female, it seems from the way that they design program, the female candidates tends to really want to have real tangible success stories that they can actually involve their family also also in the implementation of the project, whether it's farming or it's like waste management, or in some cases even conservation of species. Everything is like on the cluster number 3, which is directly implementing on the ground. For male, it ranges from like cluster 1, 2, or 4, but majority doesn't choose cluster 3. Like, we don't know why it is what it is, but yeah, most likely maybe female wants to have tangible things, and they feel comfortable to say that they're contributing if it's tangible, I think.
Yeah, I do not dare to comment what could be the reason, but it's interesting to see this difference. Maybe turning to yourself and your work in your organization. Do you feel there's a difference the way in which you work as a woman in your organization from your male colleagues?
Definitely, simply because again, it has always been like policy making, and basically under the district association, it's the first time to also be involved directly at the subnational level in a very unique way. I would say, like, this is a like I love this job in a way because it allows me not to be an external part of the government, but actually become like our language is their minion in a way. We are the secretariat, we are the backbone, and they consider us as their team. Yeah, so it's more like internal interaction with the way that the bureaucrats work, without actually becoming part of the government formally. So it's a very unique position where I started noticing also the way that, again, policy making are being made there's very there's lack of female voices basically represented from leadership perspective or during meetings. For example, it's a very rare occasion you will have an active participants that are female, that are sort of calling the shot in a way, and communicating their way. There's a lot of times where I am actually like the only female in the room that is in the position where I can make comment, I can make suggestion, I can actually go to like the top level, the bupati, in the meeting and say like, "Pa, I disagree with you." So I guess it's a new dynamic for me, and I guess for them. And in a way, it might be perceived differently if I were to start this journey, and being a male colleague. I think it's a healthy dynamic as well for them to start looking at, okay, there are female counterparts, or in a way part of our team that can make strategic suggestion, that our boss, in a way, it's like from the bureaucrat perspective, that our boss also listens to and makes sense. And this actually in anecdotal ways, yeah, there's no study on it yet, but in anecdotal ways also allow them to give voice to their subordinates that are female. And we try as best as we can, because we design different teams that we can collaborate, that can coordinate. We try as best as we can to manage the dynamic as well, so that more female are also represented even in the technical level. So that's the first. The second one is because I'm female, a lot of the times in Indonesia, when it comes to, I guess, the type of work that we do, a lot of the interaction goes stronger in an informal way. It's not during the formal meeting, but it's during like the coffee interaction, the stuff that you do like after working hours, you have dinner and then you interact. And in a way, it because I'm female, then it gives me different type of interaction ability as well when it comes to the informal setting. So I've always been like, our team consists of 3 women before, and we have to be really conscious about how it's being depicted, yeah, especially if it's after hours and it's informal setting and we're the only female in the group. Like, we just have to be really sensitive about like how culturally it's being perceived, but also for our own safetyness as female individuals. Now that the team has grown, right now we have 40% of our employees are male, And majority of the time, the liaison component, the one that is responsible for informal interaction, right now are mostly we leave it to the guys because apparently we also get different type of information if it's the ladies versus the guys that is in the informal setting. So it is what it is.
Yeah, but you start complementing each other. Men get different types of responses from women, but all responses are relevant and interesting. So I guess I also hear you say that slowly but steadily you also see men taking on the role to try to have women voices heard, or the perspective of women also included in the discussion and in the decision making.
Yeah.
Is that a correct interpretation? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe taking it at more to the national level. At the start of our conversation, you were saying how you consider International Women's Day an opportunity to both sort of take stock of the successes and maybe also to become again more aware, conscious of the challenges that remain. What stock taking in Indonesia? How do you feel Indonesia is progressing? And maybe if you can, focusing in particular to the issue of sustainability, climate change, etc. Any comments on this question?
So I would take Indonesia as a country in terms of movement that is organized at the national level and champion organizations that are working on sustainability. We have seen massive, like maybe since 5 years ago, massive shift in terms of leadership. A lot of very important positions, including like the indigenous community groups, are now represented by female leaders. And this is one trend that I really wish can also translate to the subnational level, where powerful position in terms of not only from the government perspective, but all like from champions that are pushing for sustainability, have women leaders in a way. So it's very encouraging maybe to see, give you concrete examples, maybe 3 of the biggest organizations that represent sort of long-standing journey towards more sustainable Indonesia, which is AMAN, the Indigenous Community Group, while the Friends of the Earth, and at that time also the movement over like open government and transparency was led by women. So it's a contrasting change from the way that we have been used to looking at sustainability or climate movement. Similarly, these changes also occur in the business perspective. So a lot of large businesses, especially because we're majority of the time we're linked to like sustainable commodity space. Right now during the G20, it's very apparent under the B20 group, they also have women in business council specifically to acknowledge female leadership in pushing sustainability. And it's a big group, it's a growing group. Maybe from I used to work before LTKL, I used to work convening the palm oil groups in a way, like 6 of the biggest palm oil companies. And out of the 6, we have maybe 50% female leaders in decision-making power. So it is quite consistent in other part also. But in a way, this shift, a lot of the time, we actually had discussion last year over this, are not translated into systemic change yet. It's in a way, yes, there's a trend, but whether the system is actually accommodating for more women to actually have that same chance, it is not inherent yet. So going back to maybe my first example of like, we need to work on the governance side of things. We need to actually build the system to enable this to be a common norm, not like a coincidence, not just because there's great women candidates, but actually allowing for more balanced gender representative across the board, both in private sector and in civil society. Now with the government side, there are efforts to highlight and do even formal SOP and formal guidance within ministries and government institutions to make sure that there's gender balance representative. But yeah, so there are efforts in terms of the governance reform, whether or not it has been translated to different types of leadership in the government. Maybe ministerial level, we can already see changes shifting the past cabinet, two cabinets, and we are actually also looking at it translated in the second echelon and the third echelon. So I think progress are there. One thing that might be helpful is a clear incentives. Like if you were to pursue this road of having a more gender balance, both you're in private sector, civil society, or in the government, what type of real incentives can actually the system provide you with? So linking like policy making with this type of systemic change on other cluster can be something that Indonesia pursue, especially because there are multiple studies, multiple research already showcasing if you have female leadership, what are the benefits for you as an organization. So maybe building to that and building an incentive system so that it becomes a long-term change, a long-term systemic change instead of anecdotal coincidence.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting to hear what you're saying also about the government levels, etc. Maybe just to mention that these are very much also issues that we're struggling with in the Netherlands. Over the past weeks, we've also seen a debate within my own ministry back home, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on the extent to which women have been able to also take the top positions in our ministry. So obviously very relevant and important to exchange these experiences and to learn from one another. In your answer just now, you referred to the G20. This, of course, is a very important role that Indonesia has taken on, a role with a lot of responsibility. What would be your hopes for the outcome of this G20 presidency when it comes to maybe gender, women empowerment, and then maybe also in relation to sustainability issues?
So in terms of overarching sort of wish for the G20 presidency, I would say that again, it's about looking at how we can inherently make gender lens as part of a lens across the board. So not only like specifically, establishing women's group or things like that, but actually having gender lens becoming the lens for any decision making in terms of designing programs, designing policies, designing implementation strategy. Then gender lens is something that is like a must have in a way. I know that the Indonesian government also have been pushing like SDGs to be the lens, so there can be connectivity through there and entry point that is quite obvious if you're looking at it from the SDGs in implementation. Gender is one strong component, but across the board, gender lens should be something that is immediately, not immediately, it has to be integrated rather than becoming a cluster on its own, simply because if it's becoming a cluster on its own, usually it gets forgotten or like lost somewhere. So the way that we see gender just have to maybe shift a little bit during the presidency. And right now, actually, one of the like more concrete hope that we are a part of, we're working with the Ministry of Investment, Ministry of Small Medium Scale Enterprises and Cooperatives, and also SMESCO Indonesia to actually push for an ESG readiness guidelines, both for large scale investment, but also for cooperative and small medium scale enterprises. And in a way, this has also provided us with a platform that we can aim for mainstreaming gender lens. So we have convened quite a big group of enablers right now, and a couple of them have actually been active in the space of actually using gender lens for multiple things. For example, there's Angin with the gender lens investment perspective. There's also UNDP that has been working with gender integration. So hopefully by having this momentum of the G20, we can actually have an ESG readiness guidelines for investment that is using also gender lens as a as one of the main ways of curating different type of opportunity for Indonesia. I mean, the rest of the wish, I guess, for the G20 is much more on like how do we integrate that into regulatory framework, and again, like the how do we then design the implementation strategy over it. But the incentive part that I mentioned can also be something that is awesome as an output. Like if this is a momentum where Indonesia can say, okay, we're incentivizing growth in terms of incorporating gender lens in different stakeholders. It can be linked to the investment or it can be linked to something else, but it's a good momentum to push for that, especially because there's groups that are also like there's W20, but there's also women's group in different engagement group that can actually come together and voice the same thing. So yeah, incentivizing good behavior when it comes to gender lens, Indonesia can actually use this momentum. And the third one, I guess, is much more on like how do we translate gender norms? Like people automatically think like when it comes to gender, it's like having more women, then that's enough. But as a norm in Indonesia, how does this translated into a different paradigm in Indonesia, especially for the young professional, our bonus demography, our 190 million new professionals that's upcoming for Indonesia's future. How do they perceive gender to be something that is not strictly only limited to like women and men and the way that it's balanced, but also providing space for others. Yeah.
I'm just curious, to what extent, maybe not specifically related to G20, but more in general, the international community that is here present in Indonesia, how do you feel they can best support changes like this, mainstreaming, systemic changes to enable gender equality? What do you see would be a good role for the international community, including the Embassy of the Netherlands?
So maybe three things in terms of the actual things that we can influence each other, I think. So number one, as you mentioned, Bu Ardi, it's also a struggle in different parts of the world. But there are many lessons learned and things that might be already working in other country that might be inspirational for Indonesia. But the important thing is that how do we translate this into a clear how to, in a way. Right now, probably the lessons learned and like sharing session and has always been, something that is an agenda for all countries, but to actually have that in a more structural way where it's actually a circle of learning that is much more structured and it's a how-to guide to implement different things, probably can be useful. And again, I don't want to keep mentioning G20, but it's like a big momentum, right? Like right now, it's the right time. I know that one of the women's group, for example, are proposing a global platform for women empowerment, for example, under the B20 Women in Business Council. So that type of platform that is global can actually be the platform where we harness a lot of the lessons learned and a lot of the ability for other countries to influence each other. Secondly, when it comes to actually having a gender land standard, like the UN have already been working on it for a long time, and it might be relevant to maybe pick several specific sectors that we can actually work on together, depending on the priority of each country. For example, if our intersection with the Netherlands is on commodities or in agriculture, like how can we then use that particular sector to try to build real examples and real collaborative effort to try to implement a lot of the lessons learned. So that's number two, I guess, picking a sector and then work on it and have it actually be a win-win for both countries because it's priority to both, and we can actually see the results together. And I guess the third is like influencing actual relationship, like trade and investment relationship also between the countries. And how does this actually translate into decision making when it comes to prioritizing certain transaction or prioritizing certain investment decision, or channeling or supporting specific, like for example, last year there's a specific program from one of the embassy that focuses on female entrepreneurs. How do we build this type of programs that also relate to direct trade and investment, so that at the end of the day, again, gender lens is not being seen as something that is like complementary, but it's something that is used in day-to-day decision making, and it's used because it's beneficial, because it makes sense, it makes business sense, it makes economic sense, and for policymaker it also makes sense. So maybe those three things, Bu.
Thank you, and I would be more than happy, and I think I still owe you this dinner, you and other participants of the earlier conversation that we had, to explore more in detail, more concretely, what that could mean. Maybe just to say that as an embassy, and when it comes to trade and investment, we very much talk about sustainable trade and investment that we want to promote. So yeah, we think it's more than just enhancing business relationships. It's also about the broader impact that trade and investments make in both our countries. But thank you very much for these suggestions. And like I say, I would be very happy to continue the conversation. Maybe as a last question, because I've already taken quite some time, who are your heroes? Who are the women or men that inspire you in working also towards gender equality? Do you have people who inspire you?
Yeah, so I have two. One is male, actually. Well, it's one company, but a couple of male founders actually. It's Rimba Makmur Utama. They built Katingan Pentaya project, which is right now the largest restoration project in the world. I think it's located in Central Kalimantan, and they are way ahead of their time in a way. They started in 2007 when people are not talking about this thing, and everybody thought that they're crazy. But right now they're like the biggest carbon project, I think, overall. The reason why I was inspired with them is they actually took a lot of time to shape both gender lens, but also sexual harassment SOP. It's like that was the first time that for me at that time when I got to know them first. It was the first time I saw a company that took with two male founders that took things very seriously when it comes to gender equality and also protection for the women itself. And it speaks volume because they are working on the ground. They work with like 34 villages. It's directly with like in the peat area with the peat community, and it's hard to maintain that type of standard when it's like field work, but the fact that they've been consistent in maintaining those standards. First time I met them, and I just came back from the field last month. It's the same, and it's consistent. So it's Pak Rezal Kusumatmaja and Pak Darsono Hartono are the two male founders that I think represent the he for she very well. So that's the first. The other, I mean, this is cliche, yeah, but for the female founders, I found that Ibu Shinta Kamdani, that is right now also she started IBCSD, and she started the Women in Business Council group as well, and has been leading a lot of initiative when it comes to sustainability. I think she works in a highly difficult sector for female to be a representative or even have a leadership role in, but she proves it not only within her own organization but also outside, and try to build momentum and movement over it. So I admire her a lot for keeping the, like, she's been consistent. I guess the similar thread among the two our consistency, because they've been fighting for the same fight ever since I knew them until now, and keep pushing the same change when it comes to having great female represented on the future of Indonesia in a way.
Thank you. And I feel there's something like a common thread in your answers, the emphasis on considering that the fight for gender equality, not something that we just do once a year because it's International Women's Day, but something that we need to do on a day-to-day basis, because it's a fight, a struggle, whatever you would like to call it, that needs to become part of the DNA of organizations using a gender lens, etc. So it has, like you, I believe, refer to it as systemic change that we need to consider. So thank you very much for your time. A very enjoyable conversation once again. And I've listened with great pleasure to your responses and hope to continue the conversation. I also hope that your reflection on International Women's Day, the importance of gender equality, your work here in Indonesia will also inspire others who listen to this recording. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Ibu Ardi, for taking the time.